So I find it interesting as I was praying with today's gospel, especially, that Jesus repeats himself. He says, I do not know where you are from. And that's a very interesting comment to make, especially for someone in the gospel setting that we just heard. I do not know where you are from. Now, usually if someone comes up to me and says, Father Tom, where are you from? Most of us are going to say, well, my parents were Robert and Carolyn Nelson. You know, right now they're sharing a piece of land up at our Mother of Sorrows. Come on, work with me, people. You know my humor. Well, actually, they're not sharing there. But anyway, that's another story. No, they're not even side by side. They're one row and 8 spaces apart. Yeah, but you know what? Let me tell you. Yeah, you can. When my mother passed the second time, my dad died first, and then mom died. Let me tell you something. Nobody in that cemetery got any rest because mom was yelling at dad. Yeah, it was just not pretty. The people in between were like, excuse me, trying to rest. Yeah, well, too bad. I'm yelling at him. But that's where I come from. Isn't it interesting that just in that's where I come from. Robert and Carolyn Nelson, my mother, a great sense of humor, my father, very faithful. You know, I can still visualize them sitting in the living room on 1612 Molly Drive in Carson City, right there at that house with the big living room window. There's Dad sitting in the chair like this. And there's Mom, playing solitaire. We lived on TV trays. TV trays were our lives. That's where I come from. And we all have stories of where we come from. And we all have stories, again, in the answer to that question, where do you come from? Where do we come from? We have stories and experiences of our parents and grandparents and family gatherings and all of that. But the question really is, where do we come from, especially as Christians? Where we come from as Christians, as children of God, we go back to the very beginning, which is when God created us in the garden. When God got together with the other 2 people of the Trinity and said, quote, let us make man in our image and likeness. And after our creation, what was the very first few words that was said by the most holy Trinity? It is good. It is good. And what does God say to us through the prophets, especially, I believe, Jeremiah? I knew you when you were in your mother's womb. I knit you together in your mother's womb. I blew life into you. I brought you forward. I know every hair on your head, every word you say, every thought you have. We live and move and have our being because God the Father, who lets us call him Father, thinks of us, each and every single one of us, into existence and maintains our existence. And God, who is pure love, cannot forget about us. Think about that. He cannot forget about us. We exist, we live and move. We're going to hear that in the Eucharistic prayer. In you we live and move and have our being. That is where we come from. Where we come from also is the cornerstone of the law and the prophets, of the love of God with all of our with all of who we are, with all of our mind, all of our heart, all of our soul, loving our neighbor as ourselves. That is the cornerstone of the law and the prophets. And by Jesus, where we come from is that we are brothers and sisters of Jesus. Where we come from is from Jesus' teaching about who God is, showing us who God is. And also by who we are, where we come from, is when Jesus died on the cross for each and every single human being who ever was up to that point, who existed at that time, and whoever will exist until he comes again. Whoa! That is where we come from. And where we are going is to the table of the Lord, where I believe we heard in last week's gospel, or the week before, And I invite us to take a look at that gospel again, is that when the Lord comes, he will invite us to sit at table. The Lord will put an apron around him and proceed to wait on us. That is where we come from. That is who we are. That is where we are going. So how do we maintain that, especially in the context of the gospel that we heard about the narrow gate? Let's face it, being Christian is not easy. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult. But and also when we all have something that we're working through. Maybe it's providing for our families. Maybe it's trying to find jobs or maintain a job in a very tough economy. Maybe it's the worries and concerns of our health. Maybe it's the worries and concerns of our kids. There's a whole mountain of stuff that squashes on us. So how do we maintain, especially on that walk with the Lord? First and foremost, we do it by prayer. Secondly, and also built into that, is to remember the love of God, neighbor, and self. And it comes in small ways. One of the things that happens with me, just to share a couple of stories with you, is that one of the things is that I don't like dentists. If we have any dentists here, I know we have a future hygienist, but she's, you're not a threat. I'm talking about the dentists that have sharp metal instruments that they want to put into your face. Please, those that are live streaming, do not be offended. But all of a sudden I got 2 weeks to go until I leave for Rome on sabbatical. And wouldn't you know what happens? A cap falls off and I got a cavity on the bottom. All on the same side of my face. So what happens? Because especially pressured for time, they do the whole thing in no pun intended, one shot. It wasn't no one shot. This whole side of my face was down here. My tongue was so numb that the little hygienist said, "How do you feel? Is it working?" And I said, "Yes, if you grab my tongue and stretch it out a football field, I wouldn't be able to tell." And then with the plastic over my mouth and the tooth and the doctor goes, "Oh, we have a new instrument." It felt like he was putting speed bumps into my tooth. He said, "Let me know if you need more Novocaine," after 3 shots. He was nearly done. He hit one spot where I went, "Oh, I think that needs Novocaine." And I went, "Oh no, I'm sucking this up. I am sucking this up. I have one more shot and I'm just going to be, no." Say. And then he's asking questions. "So how are you? Are you looking forward to your trip to Rome?" But it was before the office visit, especially in those situations where my sense of humor comes out even more. So I see the receptionist, the waiting room is full, and one of the ladies comes out and says, "Father, would you like to sit back, would you like to sit back here?" And she said, "But you cannot make the receptionist laugh." And I went, shoot. Or maybe it was yesterday when the tent was dropped off. We had it took 2 trucks, 3 individuals for that tent. We are not having a tent like that permanently. Mm-hmm. So, but here come 3 individuals. Immediately being the person that I am, I waved to them, "How you doing?" and everything. One of the people in particular was an older gentleman like myself with the gray hair, great build. And he starts talking to me about how he's from Guatemala and he's been dealing with an addiction for years and years and years, but he's finally been able to, live a sober lifestyle. And he goes to church rarely. And they were all packing up, getting ready to go, and I come in and I left the door unlocked for them so that they could come in and use the restroom anytime they wanted. And they were all loaded up, ready to go. And I came inside and I looked up, all the lights were off, and he was sitting about right there, praying. See how that works? That's one of the reasons why it's so wonderful to be in a community, my brothers and sisters, is that we can raise one another up, we can lift one another up, we can remind ourselves of where we come from, where we're going, and that we're not in this alone. One of the reasons, and I'll share this with you, why I, after 5 years, which will be September 1st, that I celebrate 5 years of being with you, that we went for the tent, was a number of reasons. One of them was, and I can reveal this to you now, is that whenever we do start building, where that tent is, where that setup is, but especially that tent, that's going to be the site of the walkway that joins this room to the new church building. See? And that's going to be awesome. So it's this journey that we're on. That's where we come from. We come from a loving God. And like I said, when things get very, very difficult, and they always do, we remember where we come from. We come from God. Where we are is with and always in the presence of Jesus. And where we are going is the banquet, the eternal banquet. And we do that as individuals who bring ourselves to prayer. And we do that as a community walking together with one another. That is where we come from, who we are, and where we are going, and what we celebrate, especially in the Eucharist we're about to receive, and the breakfast that we're all going to partake of in a very few short minutes. Amen?